have you ever wondered why you do what you do or why you think the way you think? It has something to do from where you came from. That's the conversation we're going to have, talking memories and how we learned what we know now. Episode 2. Let's do this.
You made that sound real serious. I'm nervous to talk about it now.
Why we do what we do.
I don't know how to tell people why they do what they do.
So the intro had a bit of a tone of seriousness, and you just need to know we're not being serious. No. I mean, we are. It's somewhat serious. Yeah. So basically, Josh and I were in a meeting. We were having a conversation about why we're thinking about a certain way of doing things or what we've learned or certain things we're trying to do now in our current level of leadership in the church. And we were just thinking, hey, do you remember in youth when we did this? Or do you remember when we were teenagers and we did this or that? Or man, when we were in youth ministry and we led this way. And I just kind of had this wow, there's a lot of how I'm thinking about leadership and about how to lead our church in the direction of pursuing God's presence and effective ministry that I learned as a teenager in small form, and then being a youth pastor, and then seeing a lot of the leaders in our church were leaders in youth. And I thought that was just a great conversation that we wanted to bring to everybody. And it's not just exclusive to youth ministry. And I mean, a lot of how we do things now, we need to find out where did that come from? And do we like where that came from? And it gave me an appreciation, not just for our church in general, but our youth ministry and how, and when we were teenagers, our youth ministry was just starting to take shape, even though it'd been around for more than a decade, I don't know how many years, but a long time. And it had its identity, but it's it was going through a transition, and we got to participate in that. And a lot of the things I want to see in our church that we've recently been doing, 10 days of prayer, and the way we're working through services and the way we're thinking about discipleship. It's I remember doing those kinds of things in different form, but the basic kinds of things in youth ministry. And I walked away thinking, man, youth ministry was pretty important for our formation. We never would have known back then, so many years ago, that we're learning things in small form that we will have to apply in large form, a decade or decade and a half later. And so it was just a fun conversation.
I think another really interesting thing about that too is recognizing how much was sown into us when we were young.
Yeah.
And running into people now who may be new to the Christian faith, new to our church, who don't have that history or don't have that context. There's so many things we know just by intuition,
right?
Or just that we've picked up by osmosis or whatever process of just sort of growing up in this, that aren't as clear or as intuitive to people who are newer to this. Yeah. And one of those things is how to interact with the presence of God. That was something we just grew up with, even in school, having chapel services, it felt like almost all of my development from age 11 through, age 17 was 4 services a week kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And it was.
Okay. So so we all, again, if you're a new listener and didn't hear from last year, we all grew up pretty close together and in our church and also in our Christian school. So during growing up, I remember there would be 2 Sunday services. There'd be a chapel service at school at least once
Fridays
a week.
Usually.
Fridays usually. And then Thursday night youth. That was every week for most of childhood. Definitely all of my middle school and high school years. And being the pastor's kid, you don't play hooky. You don't homework. Okay, great. You'll do it before church and after church. You're going to church.
Yeah.
And I am now appreciative of that, and now having to be a parent, I'm man, I don't want my kids to hate church. But I remember I never had a choice. Oh, you're sick. Great. You can be healed at church.
There is a little bit of that, listening to Old Church Basement, right?
Yeah.
That, I relate to that song so much.
My friend Josh bought a cheap guitar.
Yeah, literally the line in the song is singing about me. Yeah, I'm the Josh with the cheap guitar. Barely knew how to play it, right? That's awesome. But there is this sense of sometimes, you get further on in ministry or in what we're doing. And sometimes it's easy to just sort of drift or to lose sight of that initial connection point, or those times when we first learn to cut our teeth in the presence of God and to operate in the gifts of the Spirit, or to really know what it was like to go through a season of focused attention of prayer and seeking God, through internships and different things like that. And so much of what we learned was modeled for us, but it was also from these opportunities and these environments that I think if we're not careful, we could take for granted. So my hope, even with this conversation, is that we can reminisce on some of those things, tell some pretty fun stories, but just take whatever learning we can from that as well. And as we are in a season now where we're raising up a new generation, what do we have to be intentional to impart? That
almost is what was brewing to the surface, is like through this summer, we're launching Project Big. We were preparing for Jubilee, and this Jubilee started to have kind of a different tone to it. And so we did 10 days of prayer. And in that time, I'm recognizing, there's a lot of people who have a hunger for the presence of the Lord, but an unfamiliarity. Even some of our worship leaders, there's an unfamiliarity with the presence of the Lord. And it got me thinking, how do I even know that? How do I know, how am I familiar here? But there's people that's hungry, they love the Lord, pure of heart, just an unfamiliarity. And that got me thinking, when did I learn this? It wasn't something that every Sunday was like this growing up. And I would mark a lot, it would be youth in our youth. Even kids had a certain thing. Kids was going through a lot of different shapes. When I was a little kid, by the time I was in middle school going to youth, that's when the youth pastor there was just getting established. There was a transition in youth a little before I got in youth pastors, and it was starting to form an identity. And it was then that we were focusing on worship. The new youth pastor really put an emphasis on worship. And was really goofy. And so the emphasis was on worship, and we would practice that as a teenager. And most of the time as a teenager, I'm just you don't know what's going on, or I don't know what to do, or this is taking a long time. But it's just being in that environment over and over and over got me a familiarity of the presence of the Lord. And then now, almost pretty much 2 decades later, 2 decades later.
2 decades later.
Wow. 2 decades later, I'm leading a church going, I need to give adults this kind of practice and experience. And then it's scary. And in our conversation, it was who are the teenagers now? And who are the youth leaders and the youth pastors? And what are they? It's almost youth ministry is important. Kids ministry is important. We believe in it. We love it. And we put a lot of effort into it. And then there's just that realization, okay, are we moving our children and teenagers in the direction that is shaping their lives in a powerful way that we were shaped, but on a lower budget, on a lot fewer things, a lot more awkward environments. I mean, the chapel being a multi-purpose building with greenery, it was always a deal. As teenagers, the youth pastor just hated greenery because it was a multi-purpose building, and that was the 90s. And so you had greenery everywhere.
Oh yeah. And I remember it was always this big treat to get to decorate the stage for youth camp.
Yeah.
Because we would do youth camp, and leading up to youth camp, you would have, I think at that time it was a week of internship. And one of the primary projects was to get the sanctuary ready. And man, there was some crazy stage designs. I remember my dad welding together this giant metal hand.
What in the world?
It was so the artwork for that year's youth camp had this hand holding water running down or something. I don't know. It was weird. It's the 90s.
It's the 90s. Okay, let's just
sounds
keep that in mind.
Creed album cover.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it might not been that level of cool yet. I don't know. But I remember my dad and mom both got involved with youth ministry around the time I was coming of youth age or whatever, and they got really invested and spent a whole lot of time. But he would take on these projects to build and construct the stage and sort of bring to life whatever the theme was in the artwork. And so since it was this hand like holding like water kind of running through he welded this giant skeletal looking hand out of metal and then like did paper mache kind of all around it and there was like this hand suspended above the stage with like cellophane sort of plastic to simulate the water or whatever. My dad is a craftsman. He really is. I think he was maybe a little ambitious on this particular project, but I mean, there's so many of these things that are sort of, bored into my memory of the season of preparation before the big event or the season of like everybody knowing, hey, we're going to be exhausted for the next few weeks, like working on this, but it's going to be so worth it. Like there was this anticipation that was sort of just part of the culture.
I know Amber News, a listener.
Yeah.
She has many, many, many years of that kind of intern history, doing the same things, making those same preparations.
Yeah.
She knows what we're talking about.
Absolutely. I'm just, some of the stuff, some of the, you hear the stories of like the parents are like, just give the kid a shovel and say, hey, go dig a hole. And then like, now fill it up, like just to keep kids busy or whatever. I feel like some of the work might have been on that level. I remember spending time pulling rocks out of an old gravel parking lot. I'm like, why are we doing this?
You went, hold up. Gravel is rock.
Yes. Yeah. That's the point.
Okay. We'll just leave that there. It was the 90s. People were confused.
Yeah. It was weird. And what's so funny though, like there's a lot of these memories, that I have, just these little visual moments. And if you look at them now, you're thinking like, oh my gosh, that was so cheesy, or like, what were they thinking? And yet there was still like a pure pursuit of the Lord in all of this, even though, of course, it's the 90s, it's cheesy. But like we ended up in the process pursuing the Lord. Somehow in all of this, I remember when after the fire happened, I remember in the chapel as a teenager, it was always a big deal to have the lights out, because the big church, which is what it was always, the adult church was always called. Big church kept the really bright lights on. And how are you supposed to cultivate a worshipful environment if all the lights are on? And so it was always a big deal to have the lights down. And then after the fire, we move over to the old food bank, which ends up being, the sanctuary was in a warehouse, and there's those giant can fluorescent lights. And it's like, well, how do we do this? And so we're sitting here doing worship on Wednesday, and you hear
those big bright lights. Yeah.
And like somehow enough people, it wasn't like everybody turned out to be a, Jesus follower extraordinaire. But you look at a lot of the people leading right now, and you rewind 25 years ago, they're in kids and youth. They're experiencing things of the presence of God and experiencing the work of God and having those seeds sown. And then now we're, 2.5 decades later, and here we are leading the church and drawing off of those experiences, drawing off of what we learned. And part of, for me, is just like, man, we really did pursue the Lord. It was, I'm sure, we were all teenagers, so it was probably half-hearted pursuit, or there's highs and lows. Some seasons were like burning with passion. Passion was always the big one. So passion, on fire.
Yeah.
It was literally branded Hearts on Fire.
Hearts on Fire. Like passion music was a really big thing back then. Like before Hillsong United, there was passion albums that would come out. Every move I make in you. You remember that song?
Oh, I for sure remember that song.
Yeah.
It's a great bass line.
Yeah. Better is One Day.
I remember that one too.
Yeah. There's some really good songs back then.
See, this is really interesting for me as well, because I wasn't in youth with you guys.
No, I was in
children's church.
You were the next gen.
But right then, like children's church was taking shape at that point as well. And you had you had Nancy Gentry and Ruth Bennett taking over.
Taking over.
Yeah. And that was like, I attribute a lot of my, like where I am today with like the scriptures that I know, the faith that I have, like it's comfortable to be in the presence of the Lord, all from like kids church and youth ministry. So like the first time I was ever given a prophetic word, I was 7 years old in kids ministry, and but it wasn't weird. Even at that age, it was like, oh yeah, this makes sense. And it was normal. And so I remember watching kids get healed, and I remember kids, come with a brace and leave, and they're running and jumping, and their parents are crying. And we're like, why are you crying? They're fine. But like, I remember stuff like that. Yeah. And it was just normal, like you said. But that was, so for my family, we lived in Texas, we lived in Sherman, and we drove to the Durant campus. And then we opened up the Sherman Outreach. And
fall of 2002. No. Yes.
That was the year
spring of 2002. Yeah. That was the year I graduated.
Yeah. So we opened that up, which started a Saturday night service. And then there was still a Sunday morning service. Then there was a Thursday service in Durant, a Wednesday service in Sherman. And I went to all of them. Literally all of them. Yep. So, and then chapel on Fridays. So it's funny how we have things that overlap and like things that, you got, and there were times that you guys were in youth that I'm in children's church and you guys are having these crazy experience. We're having a crazy experience, but it makes you think like when we stepped into those roles, even like, did the kids who were in there at that point, did they have those same experiences?
I think so. You're here. I was your youth pastor.
That's true.
You just listened to the last episode.
That's true. Two of the kids in my youth work here. So maybe more, and I just don't know.
Well, I look, there's a lot of staff that were either like helped me in youth ministry or were interns under me. That was something I became very passionate about, and my wife very passionate about, is internship, like having teenagers do really hard things for a extended period of time to get that kind of encounter. And that is how we taught. It was how we discipled in not just the presence of the Lord, but how to, when you want to be carnal because you're tired and you're hot at the camp, and you have to choose to rely on grace. And seeing that now, I'm seeing them as adults. Some of them work at the church, and many of them have come back to me and it's like, hey, you remember you'd wake us up at 6 a.m. and take us to the amphitheater? I hated you for a long time. But I just want you to know, I still remember that. And I think I need to pray like that again.
Yeah.
And it came down to that. And that, I mean, it's exciting. It's comforting. But then I'm like, have we lost any of this? Like, are we ensuring that we maintain that? We are more structured now, which is good, because that was when we were kind of
Wild West.
Yeah.
Well, that was back when kids rode around on their bikes around town. Right. Yeah. That's just not the world we live in.
It was like Stranger Things.
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah. The world is profoundly different now. Yeah. But I mean, we're a bigger church. There are certain structural things that have to happen, have to take place. But the reminder this summer for me was, okay, are we nurturing that familiarity with the presence of the Lord? Yeah. When I'm seeing a lot of adults desire but be unfamiliar, it makes me really get in check. Like, first, how do I do that as a pastor now for people and not youth ministry? Like, we could just get away with so much.
Oh, dude.
I mean, we could do anything. And if it failed, a week later, kids would still show up. Right. They would still, parents, as long as we didn't do anything that hurt the kids, parents were just like, you know what, they're in youth. We don't care.
I think a lot of the benefit of that too was like the age that we were at, or when we were leading, the age that you're at, of just like, we're going to try stuff and if it doesn't work, you just don't do that again.
Yeah.
Like there was no like, I don't remember debriefing or like, you know what I mean? I don't remember us sitting down and going, why didn't this work?
Right.
Like we didn't try to figure that out.
We're just like, oh, that didn't work.
Let's not do that again.
Yeah.
That was it. That was the end of it. And if one night we have a 45-minute worship set and it goes great, guess what? We're doing that again next week because it went great this last week. Nobody talks about it. We just do it.
There is a lot that happens just through intuition and feeling whenever you have a team around you that is doing ministry services like that just so regularly. And it's just like, hey, I can anticipate where Pastor Jacob's going to go. And so I'm going to extend this song. Yeah. And like, there's so much of that becomes almost unspoken.
I have such a comfort for Andrew Cacho when he's MD on stage.
Yeah.
Because like he and Hollis and I did youth ministry together. We were here in Sherman campus together. Like I knew where he would go. He knew where I would go on things. I look at Andrew, I give him a look. He knows what I'm doing, and it's like we just did it over and over, and we screwed it up so many times that like we just failed and bombed and did it again and again and again and again, and like we got better and better and better, and then it's like after years of doing that together, like okay, well now we're familiar, and so when something irregular, something that, the Holy Spirit shows up, you can't control what happens. It happens in immature people, so people act immature. When something out of the norm happens, you're not freaking out. You're not weirded out by that because you've practiced that. And it's just by doing it repetitiously, and then you develop a skill. And that's why I appreciate all the certain leaders that like I've been around for a long time, because when Andrew's not there, it's been hard with the MD or the worship leader in Durant. Like I'll give him a look and I get like a funny look back, and like I just have to say, go do the bridge.
Yeah, because like something the listener and viewer should know, Andrew Cacho is like, this is a shout out to him, but like Durant and Sherman worship teams, we both get the opportunity to use him, and it's
but not at the same time.
Not obviously. At the same time. So we are just like we both want him so badly because he is just an excellent MD, which is a musical director. So he has a microphone that he's talking to the band and telling us what to do, basically. And so if he knows or senses something with Jacob, he'll just start calling out chords, and everybody else better just keep up. And so
just play this.
Yeah, but having him is it's perfect. He also has this extremely weird gift where any song he's played, he can play it again from like recall. And we're like, oh my gosh, dude.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
There's also a memory of ingenuity that we had to have because we had no budget. So we had to figure out how to do things free or like super cheap or on like youth giving budget.
Yep.
I mean, we may not know that teenagers don't give a lot.
We used a lot of black lights back then.
Yeah.
That continued into the 2000s.
But I remember there was one service not too long ago where I wanted the worship team to get somewhere, and I was timing it in prayer, and they were going to follow. But I finished praying, and like I had all the obvious cues, and it wasn't Andrew on MD. And I saw the MD looking for the loop, the track to get lined up to the bridge or whatever I was asking to do. And it took like a long time.
Yeah.
And I feel bad for them. They're learning new system and all that. And then I had a conversation with Andrew. I'm like, hey, you remember in youth where we never had a click? We never had a loop.
Get there.
You just went there. Like, is there a way for us to not lose the excellence, but like, are there some of those muscles we need to practice again and exercise? Or a couple years ago, we were preparing for Jubilee, and this was when we were at the event center. And so the budget, like, it was very costly. And I remember there was conversations like, well, what's our budget for this? What's our budget for this? And I'm like, when did we get to the point where like, I have to spend this much money? Like, Where's that innocent like past we had of like, we just made it work. We had to figure out how, you had whatever guitar gear you had. There wasn't like the ministry will, front all the guitar gear.
The youth sound got an upgrade every Christmas, right? Because I would get a new pedal or something for Christmas. I'm like, look guys, look what I got.
The sounds have expanded this next worship set.
We can play that Passion song now. Oh man.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, some of that's nostalgia, and we're sounding kind of old with that kind of nostalgia.
Yeah. But you guys are starting to sound old.
Oh, well, sorry.
But it keeps me thinking fresh about like where we're at in what expectations of what church is and what church should be. There are all sorts of expectations, and there's a modern megachurch kind of format that isn't one size fits all. There's flexibility, but there's some basic things that seem to be across the board in the American church that is, big mega churches, and people bring those expectations, and it makes me think, how do we not lose some of the purity and innocence of we're just making Jesus the one thing. And somehow we learned that in teenagers with youth pastors who were immature while we were immature teenagers in a immature system, that we made all sorts of mistakes. So many things were cheesy. Not everything was excellent, but like we walk away now as adults raising kids and going like, how do we give that to them?
Yep.
And I don't have an answer yet. It's just remembering has been just the exercise of like, I learned this from somewhere. And then I've recently, I tried to really delegate things, but there's certain things I learned because I was raised by the pastor that I forget other people don't know. You're talking about intuition. I have a trained intuition, and I didn't necessarily try. It's just, I started doing transitions at 17 years old because not a lot of people enjoyed doing them. And I was just told I had to figure it out. And every single week I did transitions, my dad critiqued me, like sometimes during the fellowship break. And at that time we took like a 5-6 minute fellowship break, and he would go back to the
little scorecard. This was a 7 out of 10.
He's like, you need to stop doing this, stop doing that. You need to start doing this. You've really messed that one up. And like, I'd hear that every single Sunday. And I have a little bit of an achiever in me. There's a little bit of second born, like underdog. I'm going to be better than other people that don't think I can do it. And so when my dad's like, you need to fix this, you fix this, I'm like, then done. Consider it done. I'll show you next time. And then I'll mess up something else. And then I ran media for a few years. And so
hold on. And it was called media.
Yep.
Yes.
That term is so
department. Funny. The media department. Yep.
What's funny is it doesn't sound foreign to me, because that's where both of us got our first jobs in ministry, was in the media department.
Yep.
And
you just couldn't do that anymore. You just couldn't do that
couldn't
anymore.
Name it media department.
Yeah, no, dude. Like
you can call it social media department.
See, that's its own department.
Yeah.
And then you've got like
it's
production, and then you've got worship, and then you've got like it's just funny, everything that fell into that.
Everything fell into the media department.
Oh yeah.
But my dad would be like, you need to change the words in this way. You need to start doing that. You were a little behind on this. And so like, I got my dad's feedback all the time, and he had no problem being honest with me. He might've struggled being honest with others, but he didn't have any struggle with me. And the same thing for my brother. My brother ran media department, media. He ran the media department for a while. And so he would get my dad's feedback. And like, that's basically where debriefs came from, is my dad's just like, and his point was like, I know by tomorrow I'm going to forget all this. So
I'm going to tell you right now.
And then he just machine gun them all out.
Yeah.
But it gave me a critical eye for things. It gave me an awareness of certain things. Just even during the 10 days of prayer, he's like, hey, this is my dad. Now he's coach. He's not like my boss. Yeah. He's just an elder. He's like, hey, I could have been missing it here, but this particular leader, when this thing was happening, it potentially could have shut down. Like, I could tell the Lord was doing something there, but we kind of shifted gears and went on to something else. And just have that in your mind next time. And that's my dad's coaching voice. Just have that in your mind next time. I could have not seen it right, but just have it in your mind next time. But it's that kind of like, here's what I see. There was a Sunday. It was Father's Day, and I wasn't speaking. I was here in Sherman, and I was just getting to attend that week. And that morning, and I'm still getting used to what it means to be the senior pastor. Mm-hmm. So there's certain things that happen spiritually that there's no training book in. There's certain feelings or inclinations or certain impressions you get that before I would just write that off as my own head, that I'm still learning, like, oh, that might be the Lord, like saying things or doing things. But anyway, with that morning, woke up and I was just praying and kind of just interceding for that morning. And I started sensing something, just praying about something. It had to do with breakthrough or a few other things like that. But the specific phrase that came is it's the anointing that breaks the yoke, for whatever reason. And then phrases like that come in out of my head. So I just prayed that over the services. And then we get in the huddle that morning and there's a time to pray. And so I pray that. And like, to me, that was it. Like, that's what I do. And then during the service, there was like some real energy in a direction, and someone gave a tongue. And like, I had the same kind of basic feeling, but I mean, full disclosure, I'm a charismatic. I have never had an interpretation of tongue. I've never had a public tongue.
Yeah.
And I've never had the interpretation to tongue. I've had to be responsible as a campus pastor to guide an environment. Mm-hmm. When moments like that happen, but never have I had the interpretations. Honestly, I've never practiced that. And so anyway, there wasn't an interpretation that particular day. And then Austin was closing the service. And so I'm texting Austin, here's how to handle that. And then I go to lunch that day, and I go to lunch with my parents once or twice a month after the service. And that's just where we talk about everything, ministry, whatever. And I was like, hey, this happened and this happened. And it's like, oh, okay, well, did you clarify that? I'm like, yeah, I had this thing that morning and just praying about it. And I don't know, I kind of felt like that might have been. And he's like, you should have said something. Like he got up and like, you should have said something. And I was just like, whoa, Dad, hang on. That's awesome. This is not your normal coaching. So what's going on? He's like, listen, that plus that equals what the Lord says. So that was your responsibility. Next time you need to get up and confidently say, thus saith the Lord, because that's what that means. And so like, because I get that, not all the time. I don't get that kind of coaching all the time. But because I get that, sometimes I forget what I know others don't know, because I didn't get it myself. It had to be coached in me, but I forget where I got it. There's things from kids ministry and youth ministry, and then leading youth ministry, and then all the different environments and all the people I've interacted with. You're at what, 17 years, 18 years? Mm-hmm.
Coming up on 18, I think.
You're at 18 years, or 19 years, maybe. You might be at 18.
Yeah, anyway, at 18.
A long time. You know things that others don't know.
16, going on 17. Man, that's a throwback. Wow. Sound of Music reference.
Sound of Music.
Wow.
You know things others don't know.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it's just important that we know how to start coaching others, to give them what we know and not assume they already know it.
I think one of the coolest things, or that I look back now with just appreciation, was how much opportunity we really had to, I don't want to say play church, but really like without a lot of risk or a lot of some of the potential downsides of doing it in a more corporate adult service. Like the amount of opportunity we had to try things and experiment and to learn has just been invaluable. I think now that we are in a place where we're leading grown-ups,
big church.
Now that we are a big church, we can turn the lights down because we want to. We've got we're in this place where we have to be careful if we're not paying attention. We can just become comfortable, or it's that you even said it today in the huddle. Time in erodes awareness of. Like, we can stop being aware of why these things are important, or why we have a familiarity with God's presence and other people don't, if we're not paying attention to it. And so I think for me, like, I just have a great sense of appreciation of internships, of camps, of all of those different opportunities, of even like being in the chapel band, things that, like, who would trust a group of teenagers to lead worship every Friday? But for some reason, it worked. With my class. Like, I had four other friends, or
you,
5. Yeah, Aaron, me, Aaron, Hollis, Chris,
and Chris.
Yeah.
So
God Kabod
back in the day. Yeah, like we all had this like dream, like, hey, we're going to be in a band, we're going to tour, and we're going to like take over the world or whatever. But in the moment, we were just being faithful with what we had. But it wasn't just us being faithful; it was grown-ups, adults who were willing to give us that room, and who were willing to see a gift in us and say, hey, here's an opportunity to express that. And, oh, by the way, this is how you operate in that come alongside with me, you know, like playing in youth band with, you know, some grownups and some youth, and having those grownups say, hey, this is what I've learned musically, train us on what to do. And it wasn't just like, oh yeah, whatever you want to do, figure it out. There was enough coaching and leading there to where it felt like we were going somewhere. And so I look back on those times with great appreciation, and just like a recognition of, like, that was a season of preparation that we weren't even really aware of. And it was preparing us for what we're doing now. And I want to be sensitive to those opportunities to make way for those things to happen for the next generation too. It's just so important, because like if the only ever opportunity you get is like the big show or whatever, like, hey, here's your chance. And you've never been in that environment before, and you come and it doesn't go so well, and then you go through this like self-defeat process, then, you know, it's not going to prepare you for actual leading someday. So anyway, man, there's some crazy stuff we got up to back in the days though. Like, I remember, do you remember street raids?
Yes.
So this may have been before your time.
It definitely was. It sounds like some fighting video game.
Well, this was a very 90s thing. It's like street evangelism sort of a thing. But what we would do is we would literally like load up a trailer, like a flatbed trailer. We would bring all of the sound equipment from the youth building and load it up on...
Unhook it all,
load it up on this trailer.
Not a travel kit, the same kit.
And we would go and set up like in a green spray parking lot or someplace, and set up a stage on this trailer and do a worship set like out in the middle of the community. And you would get drunk people show up. You would get, you know, all kinds of random people sort of show up. And then we would take groups of teenagers with an adult leader and like go out and do evangelism. Like, we would hand out little Gospels of John and stuff like that. And it was like, you know, I remember doing that and being a part of that. And, you know, I was super scared and timid, and I didn't hardly speak much, but being in that environment of like, hey, we're going to not just be in our church, we're going to go. There were some really like formative and cool things that came out of that. You know, how effective it was, and, you know, whether it made that much of an impact long term, who knows? But there was like a boldness and like a pioneering that we had of like, hey, we're just going to go do this thing. And there was a drama club. Dramas were like really big back then. And I remember being in on the drama team, and like, we had do you remember I think the band's name was Insyderz, but with a Z, so they were a ska band.
No, I did not.
Yeah, they had a song called "The Hunted," and we did this whole skit. I was Jesus in the skit, and so I had this giant Bible.
Because Jesus has a giant Bible.
Well, I had to fight off the darkness somehow, so I had this giant Bible. Hollis was the devil. And he was trying to like attack me or something. There was this whole, you know, different thing. And then we get into this like hand-to-hand combat thing where he's trying to take me out, and I'm like blocking him with the Bible. Man, this is stuff that, you know, nowadays is so cheesy, so corny, and it's almost, you know, cringy to think about. But it was like, okay, here's a chance for these silly teenagers to express themselves in worship and use this dumb Christian rock song. And
I'm gonna have to look up Insyderz.
The Insyderz with a Z. You got to remember the Z.
Supertones.
See what I
They're like in the Supertones kind of era.
I love that. Hopefully, this story is someone's conversion story.
Seriously,
so
they're hearing it.
Like, that was me.
But like, I remember like being in the chapel, this was before the fire, and we're like doing this whole thing.
That's crazy, man.
Like I got a little carried away with the Bible, so I kind of smacked Hollis in the face, and he had like his makeup got like wiped off. He kind of looked like Darth Maul, like after his all his makeup was done. And
this is before.
Yeah, this is before.
You guys were ahead of your time.
Well, yeah. It was a while ago, but man, it was crazy. I look back on those moments, and I can either have an attitude of, oh, that's cheesy. How. What were we thinking? Or I can look back with gratitude and appreciation and say, hey, look, this was a chance for me to express myself through drama or whatever it was, and to have a team who is trying to tell a story that brings people to Jesus. Yeah. Were we great at it? No. Was it the best production? No. That doesn't matter as much as us being obedient to what God was doing at the time.
We're in Durant, Oklahoma, and we're not going to expect to be, but like, that doesn't mean we do nothing. It doesn't mean that we accept doing nothing, or just because we might be a little nervous being cheesy means we do nothing. Like that was something that I appreciate about our church is we weren't willing to do nothing. We're going to do something. So how do we figure this out? So what would be the learning? Because we're having direct conversation. This is this direct subject about the church, and it has great implications in the church and things that I want to see in our church, but not every listener is going to be working in a church. So like, what is the learning of these different formative moments and seasons that are that can cross-reference to other industries or other environments or families?
I think for me, what I learned most during that season was a sense of ownership of my church. Yeah. And I felt like there was an empowerment to participate at whatever level I was capable of participating, whether it was playing guitar or being on the drama team or whatever. Yeah. Like there was opportunity and encouragement, and then this empowerment to, hey, you youth member are somebody who is responsible for helping to build your youth church. And I think that is one of the things that really has stuck with me throughout the years, and even going through the fire and different things that we went through as youth, as interns, was this sense of, I have a part to play in building this church. Obviously, we know Christ builds the church, but there was an active role to play, not a passive role. It wasn't a look back or look around and watch other people do everything. There was this invitation and this empowerment to be assembled and to step into whatever my gifting was, and to use that to be obedient to God and to help build his church. And I think that's what I hold on to most from that season. And it's fun listening or fun like looking back and thinking through those memories and different crazy things that happen. You don't even really think that they're crazy at the time, or that you would look back and think it was anything special. Yeah. But like looking back, I'm like, no, that was God doing something. And I remember like specifically being in a service one time. It was in a youth camp, and looking around and sort of being in this space of just resting in God's presence and looking around, and God dropping in my heart, you're going to be a part of making environments like this for the rest of your life. And I didn't know what that meant at the time. I thought, okay, I'm going to be on a worship team that goes and plays songs and stuff. But like seeing how that has come into fruition even in my life and in my role, it's like that was a seed that was planted. And I just felt just so much confidence and peace in that moment of, this is something you were made for. And it wasn't around anything spectacular. It was just this type of space where people get to encounter Jesus. You're going to be a part of making spaces like that. And that is something that has stuck with me. And even in what I do now, when I sometimes forget, why I do what I do, I remember those little moments that happened then. And I'm like, you know what? No, God knew what he was doing. And he's got me where he wants me. And anyway, that's sort of my learning, my takeaway.
So ownership.
Yeah.
One of the things you said earlier, safety, is like the ability to try things and it be kind of in a low risk kind of way that if someone messes up or if someone learning messes up, it's not high risk and they can learn from it. And so safety and then coaching were a couple of the things that I was kind of hearing in our stories.
Yeah.
You need some more stories, Tyler.
I have a bunch of stories.
Oh, I'm sure you do.
What's some of the learning?
Some of the learning, I would say, one thing, I never felt like, I heard this a lot growing up, and I always felt like it was for the other kids, and now I'm really thankful. Like, it wasn't a message that I tuned out. It wasn't one of those. It was just like, that's not me, and I was very thankful for that. And now looking back, I see why. But it was that message of, like, you can't live your parents' faith. Mm-hmm. Like, I never felt that. I never felt like I'm only a Christian because my parents are a Christian. They forced me to go to church or anything like that. Mm-hmm. And as we've been talking, so we're actually in a space that I used to be the youth pastor of, which is a little odd. But being in this space and even talking through some of these stories, I'm remembering, like, I remember we moved into this building, and it was before I had built an internship or had any sort of team, and I had to move us from one location to this new location, and I had no help. And I just remember thinking, like, well, I just got to do it. Like, there's no choice. You know what I mean? Like, I'm doing this. And now looking back, I'm like, that taught me, like, obedience and sacrifice. Mm-hmm. Like, that was a big thing for me, was like, that drive to do it wasn't to impress anybody. I didn't do it out of anger because there was no one here to help me. It was just like that call to action, to do something, like, be a part. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I've never felt that disconnect from the church. I never felt that, like, nobody cares for me or whatever. Not that there's, you know, I'm not trying to belittle that. I'm just saying I never had to go through that. And I think it's because of the way that I was raised and the way that I was, and I'm not just talking about my parents. I'm talking about, like, in children's church, in youth ministry, up until, I mean, young adult, everything. I felt like I was fully covered always. And so I didn't go through some of those typical things, but obedience and sacrifice, like, those were things that came up over and over and over again in my life. And those are things now that are beneficial in my marriage. They're beneficial with my kids. Like, I got to make sacrifices, and that's okay. Like, it's for a purpose, it's for a cause. But even cultivating some of these environments in my house. So this is almost challenging too, where I'm like, is my kid getting all of this?
It's like, there's so much of this that's important. How do we?
We're wondering that too.
Yeah.
So
So, like, I remember I was like 20. I was probably 20, 19 or 20. And we were just in this place of, it's funny how long the youth ministry didn't have money. I'm realizing I still didn't have any money in our budget at this point. So we just did a worship night at my house. And I did not have a big house. Like, maybe it's like 1,300 square feet or something. But we had 50 people over. So just to do, like, it was like, we're going to make it work. We found, like, some old stereo speakers that we just, like, found a way to hook them up to a computer. I don't even know how we did that. Hooked microphones up to the computer so they would go through those all through the house in different rooms. Like, thinking back on this now, I'm like, that's crazy. Yeah. Like, we should have just went outside, or you know what I'm saying? But we were like, there was just that obedience. Like, we knew we were supposed to do one, and then sacrifice. Like, we got to make our house a sanctuary. It was just crazy. But anyhow, man. Obedience and sacrifice.
Yep. And film festivals.
Oh my goodness. I never won a Kenny. But
so for a little bit of my career as Sherman youth pastor, we launched the New Year's Film Festival, where different people, leaders, youth would make a film and submit it into the film festival. And then the award for best whatever, we had different categories, was a Kenny, which was a Ken doll.
Painted gold.
Spray painted gold.
I was responsible for painting those.
So, and this is when, like, cameras were not readily available to everyone.
No. Like, there's no such thing as an iPad.
Yeah,
so you can just take
there's no phone. There's just, you actually had to have a video camera.
Yep.
And so it was, so many were terrible, but there were so many that just made us laugh and laugh and laugh. It was, I would say, is one of the better things we did.
Yeah.
Even, it might not have been the most successful, but it was a lot of fun.
Well, that whole time in my life, so for when you were youth pastor, was like, I mean, those were the most formational years probably of my life. But having even the leadership that was around back then. So like as little credit as I want to give him, Matt Morrison was, I mean, he was like, he stepped in as like a big brother figure for me in a lot of ways. I mean, he would pick me up so we could film video announcements. Like it was that important. Every Tuesday I had to be there for video announcements to help film. And then we would have band practice, but it was like, you can't miss.
No.
I don't know why I felt that way, but I was like, I can't not be there.
No, certainly not.
But he would, sometimes he'd drive and pick me up from school, or like, it was just, that's just the way it was, man.
Yep.
So that was a great time.
There was a shared sense of purpose and passion and like, who cares what it cost kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And not in a, we're going to spend as much as we can. It was, we're going to make it happen even though we don't have anything to spend.
So need
awesome.
or limitations aren't bad. We serve a limitless God, but limitations in our lives are a way of us exercising and growing and maturing, because that, what is it? Necessity is the mother of
invention.
That like back in those youth days, we had a single video camera. It was like, make it work. It was a DV cam. Make it work. And there's a little bit of that I want us to have again.
Yeah, that creativity. You can't lose that creativity.
There's a bit of an edge. That's why I think a lot of our generation has some entrepreneurial energy, is we desire that. We want to live on that edge, and I don't want to lose that. Any other learnings for our listeners, especially that aren't going to work in the church? Although cultivating an atmosphere for your children and getting your children, teenagers in an environment has a greater effect, even if you can't see it immediately. We're 2 decades later and saying we remember these things that in the moment we probably rolled our eyes. We probably said that's stupid, or I don't want to do that. And yet my mom said, you don't have a choice, Jacob. You're going. You're getting involved. You're doing this. What else?
I think if you take away all of the silliness and all of the churchiness, one of the things that I think really was emphasized in the right way was just this relentless pursuit of God, and how important it was to, like you kind of touched on it, not to just have your parents' faith, but to have your own like connection with Jesus. And I think when you get down to it, just that simple desire to be a disciple of Jesus was something that was, it was presented in different ways, talked about in different ways, but it was there in that season. And there was, it wasn't about pursuing wild experiences in God's presence, or, having really emotional song services and different things happening. It was, how can we just seek after Jesus? And I really do think there was a sincere and heartfelt desire to see kids like us connect to Jesus in a very real and tangible way. And I think God filled in a lot of the gaps.
And because there was a lot of gaps.
Because of that sincere, pure heart to see kids, to see teenagers, to see young men and women really encounter Jesus in a life-changing way. I think God was able to use whatever other things were going on at the time to really minister to us, to help us understand how to navigate the presence of God, to forge relationships that have just proven to be lifelong friendships and sort of brothers in arms kind of relationships that we still find valuable to this day. But I think it all really did come centered back to that place of, you could, if you want to go back to even the name of the youth ministry, to have a heart that was on fire for Jesus, like to really just burn with passion for Jesus. That is I think the central theme of that season of my life is that almost like every message, every chance to hear, every camp was always focused around how do we get kids to have that hunger and that desire for Jesus. And so at a simple level, whether we ended up in ministry or not, that was about the best thing that could be imparted, I think, in that time.
So we have to walk away leading now, parents, pastors, leaders in these environments, that keep the center of gravity on pursuing Jesus at all cost, regardless of limitation or hindrance, pursuing Jesus at all cost, and let everything else flow from that. Not having great services, having excellent worship experiences, or a well executed set list, or highly refined systems, or great production. It's got to be Jesus, and we'll just assign this episode to all of our student ministry leaders.
Yeah. Well, I think they'll see how important this is. Like it was. I think it was vital for us. It was like vital to those that we led.
Yeah. Or to the leaders who led us, who may at some point even listen to this. I mean, I just want to say thank you for being faithful with what you had.
Right.
And being true to that call for whatever season it was, to see kids and to see an opportunity to connect them to Jesus in a real and life-changing way. Because those leaders said yes to that. We're all in a place now that we're reaping the benefit of that.
Yeah. And you're here, so thank you. But also I think it was more my generation you know what I mean?
Yeah.
My group,
your portion of
my portion of the generation had Nancy and Ruth.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they've ever been told how like appreciative we are.
So Miss Nancy was it was either one of the nights of prayer or one of the Sunday mornings here in Durant recently. And she came to the front and I gave her a big hug, and Hannah was like, you need to know, like we're reaping fruit of seeds you sowed, like the years you put into this, the energy, what people are experiencing, like you sowed to that. So thank you for your years of sacrifice.
Because I find myself,
my wife's just super nice about, she's so good about saying thank you to people.
But I found myself in situations in life where like God will just call something back from my like deep memory, and it's something that Nancy had said, or it was something that Ruth had said, or something Sherry had said, or something Mr. Ray had said, and I'm just like, where did that come from? I hardly remember my childhood very well, and then boom, I just get this like, wow, okay, I really needed that, and so. I'm also the type who's like, man, I really need to tell them thank you. And then I don't. But I will.
Yep.
This is me doing that. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And like going back and watching old Gospel Bill episodes.
Oh, don't get me started on Gospel Bill. I love Gospel Bill.
There's so many like nuggets of truth in those that I'm like, man, that's still good for me to hear nowadays.
Growing up, I thought Nicodemus was my dad. I don't know why. You know, when you're a little kid, you confuse who like your parents are sometimes. Yeah, Nicodemus totally thought that was my dad. Isn't that weird?
That is weird.
Yeah, that's weird.
Well, I think that brings us to the end of this one.
What a great episode.
What a great one.
I loved that one.
No, that was fun. Trips down memory lane are always fun.
They're fun because I also get to hear from you guys, and I don't know all those stories.
I didn't even get into the story of Fire Factor and moving worms around bowls and anything
with his mouth. Yeah. You guys should know that. That's not just picking up worms. Nasty even worse.
Games. Yeah, this is so gross.
Oh man! Well, that brings us to the end of this episode. I think. Yeah, I feel like that was great. That was a pretty good one. So, I would say if you have not already left us a review, that would be so awesome. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. Maybe you enjoyed this episode, and maybe you've got some fun memories of your time in youth ministry, or maybe you are a youth and you're like, what are you guys talking about?
We are very self-aware that our stories are cheesy.
Yep. Yes. So we would love to hear from you. Please post a review or a comment. Let us know what you think. You can always leave feedback or a question on Pastor Jacob's website, jacobsheriff.com. And we would love to hear from you. And I said that 4 times already. So what's next? I forget the rest of that.
That's it, man. That's it. Yeah. You did a great job. Everyone give Josh a round of applause. You did a wonderful job.
No, applause. Yay.
All right. We're going to have to figure something out about that thing.
The whole, I got to use the soundboard one time. This is going to be the consistent
thread through the season. Is like me trying to get you to stop using that. It's going to be great.
Yeah. We'll see you on the next one.